Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone's enjoying the either dreadful January cold, or if you're on the East Coast like me and Ryan, it's like 60 degrees out and kind of strange. But thanks for everyone for tuning in. Ryan's going to talk a little bit about the upcoming year. I guess we should also discuss a little bit of the past year. Wanted to put this out there. If anyone has any questions or comments, you can type them into the chat. Be great to get some feedback or to answer any questions you might have live. We did get a few questions beforehand that I'm going to work into the conversation. But before that, I guess a little warm up. Ryan, I know that this past year you got a folding bike and you've been taking it on some trail adventures and traveling with it, as well as commuting. As a folding bike connoisseur now, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, thanks, Jorge. Great to see you, and thanks everyone for joining. We appreciate the opportunity. I hope everyone has had a great start to their new year. I almost couldn't get my camera to work. For some reason, it worked all day, and then it didn't. So excuse me if I'm a little flustered. I thought we were going to have to do this as a podcast, but great to be here with all of you. And let's see, Jorge, to your question about being a folding bike connoisseur, I wouldn't call myself a connoisseur, but it has been an exciting dimension of riding for me. So I ride recreationally almost every weekend, and I've tried to really find ways to bring biking into my personal life. That's something we're trying to really promote at Rails to Trails, to try to find ways to swap short trips and walk, bike, find other ways to do it. I have a rather long commute from Ellicott City, Maryland into Washington, D.C., and I figured out how to do it by bike, that I could, if I had a folding bike, I could bring it onto a commuter bus, take the bus in, and then get there to the office. So what's really gratifying is that I'm able to go about 30 miles each direction from Ellicott City to Washington, D.C., and not get in a car at all. So that's been a nice lifestyle adjustment for me. And I asked for Christmas for a suitcase to put my folding bike in, and my wife was kind enough to give that to me. So I now can take my bike just about anywhere, and in fact did that over the holidays. So just shows that if you put a little planning in, you can really make walking and biking part of your lifestyle, no matter how far you have to travel.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Makes me kind of miss my commute to our Philadelphia office. I took the trail in the whole way, and I would do about 10 miles each way, which was pretty great. But yeah, as long as you're planning, you can really work it in there. I still have piles of cycling clothing that I haven't really touched much. Don't really need gloves for 10-degree weather all the time. Well, it seems about like this time last year, we were talking about things to come. And what a year it's been. I know that recently there's been some updates on Capitol Hill. Maybe let's start with that and talk a little bit about funding and appropriations.
Sounds good, Jorge. And just to repeat, if any of you have questions, please add them. This is really your time to put forward anything you might be curious about the organization as we start the new year. But boy, there's a lot to talk about. And you might have seen this in some of our communications, but we're calling this time and this year really a once-in-a-generation moment. And I don't think that's hyperbole when it comes to the opportunity to dramatically increase opportunities for safe walking and biking. And that's because of three reasons. One is this shift in attitudes and behaviors that we saw over COVID. It's sustaining. It's in fact really one of those things that people are doing and continuing on into their daily lives. Elected leaders are following suit and supporting it. There's unprecedented funding for trail infrastructure, and we have so many miles of trails all across the country. We can now connect them into seamless systems. So Jorge, your question was about Capitol Hill and our federal advocacy work. And I think everyone knows, certainly any of you that are deep in the trails movement, there's been substantial increases in federal funding for trails, and much of that out of the bipartisan infrastructure law. Specifically, the Transportation Alternatives Program, we were able to almost double that program. So it was $750 million before this reauthorization. It's now $1.3 billion annually. And we were also able to put in some safeguards to make sure that those funds that then go to states can't be used for other purposes. They have to be used for trails and active transportation. A very recent win, one we're quite excited about, is another thing that was in the infrastructure bill was a program called the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program. It's a new program and the first program ever to be funding specifically trail systems, big investments that really close gaps and create connected trail networks. It was authorized, it was not appropriated though in all of the infrastructure negotiations. And so what we have before us as a movement is the need to get it appropriated annually. And we just got it appropriated, not at the amount we want. We were hoping for 200 million. For this year, it's just for 45 million, but it's a big win to at least get that marker in the sand and then be able to really advocate aggressively to get it increased year after year. Oh, and last thing, Jorge, I'd say is that another thing we're seeing at the federal level is that funding, not just for trails, dedicated funding for trails, but funding just for transportation infrastructure is going disproportionately to trails and active transportation. The RAISE program, which is a federal program that can go to all different modes of transportation, to roads, to bridges, to other forms, we're seeing in each of these massive multi-billion rounds more going to trails and active transportation than ever before. The last round, which was 2.2 billion, by our calculations, about 20% of that went to some form of trails, walking and biking infrastructure, 20% to some project that involved complete streets and pedestrian safety. So as much as 40% of that round going to all different forms of transportation is going to trails and active transportation. That's mind-blowing. That was almost hard to conceive of in a previous era. But this era, we're just seeing as a society, we're choosing to commit to safe walking and biking in ways we never have before.
Yeah, it really does feel like a new era with this influx of funding that's been coming through and people turning to trails for transit and recreation now more so than ever. And, you know, since we're starting on the federal level, let's kind of work our way down to the local level. I guess I had a question that came in from a donor in California who had a question about the Great Redwood Trail and some of the obstacles they've been facing, even though the rail bank, I believe, was approved in October 2022. So maybe since we just discussed the federal level, let's go to state and then we can discuss local, since that's another question that came in. California had some big wins for funding this year, but do you want to address some of that setbacks in that Great Redwood project?
Yeah, Jorge, if you could be maybe a little more specific, because I would say there's been a lot of progress. I know there are certainly lots of stops and starts when it comes to rail banking and corridor acquisition. Maybe I'll put one note and I would love some more specificity as to the question. I talked a lot about all the investment at the federal level. We're seeing concurrent massive investment among states, matching that federal funding to really create these connected systems. California was the real leader this past year. They passed a new program that's going to invest $1 billion, with a B, $1 billion of additional funding into trail and connected networks. So massive investment, just I think a real accelerator for all kinds of projects that will happen in California, be it the Bay Area Trails Collaborative or the Great Redwood Trail. And I'll just say, wanting to hear more about the question, the Great Redwood Trail, for those who don't know, is going to be a really, really exciting project. So it's going to go from San Francisco all the way north to essentially Humboldt Bay, the north part of California. And when it's complete, it'll be 316 miles, the longest rail trail in the entire country, going through just stunning scenery and stunning landscapes. But Jorge, tell me more about the question and what the concern is.
I just pulled it up so I could read from it. The question was about the lawsuits that the project has been facing as lawyers are kind of canvassing some of the landowners and the resistance that the project is getting on the ground there, which, you know, is unfortunately some of the obstacles that a lot of trail projects face. And they also, just to paraphrase here, with rail banking, is it possible to impose stricter time limits on these legal challenges that bog down trail projects? That's kind of the crux of their question there.
Well, those are good questions, and thank you for your involvement in this project. Rail to Trails has a modest role, but one that hopefully is adding value to advancing the project. The truth of it is rail trail projects often involve complex and even adversarial administrative procedures. That's due to the often competing interests among local landowners, advocates, anything when you're trying to do something that's big and bold and transformative. I will say in our experience, it's rare to have a transformative project that doesn't have in early stages different points of view and levels of support and opposition. I can't think of a single completed rail trail that in the end isn't significantly supported, not only by traditional advocates, but even those who might have been skeptical at the early stages. So I think the good news with the Great Redwood Trail is that it received a positive decision from the Surface Transportation Board to advance rail banking. And I think most folks know that rail banking is essentially what makes rail trails possible. It allows for trails to be put into essentially an interim use that then a local agency will take possession of the rail corridor. It gives an incentive for rail companies to allow that change in use while also preserving the interests of adjacent property owners. So it is, in some ways, the bedrock of what we do in trail conversion. It can take time. And so there are, at times, setbacks. But maybe the most important thing for you to know who's involved in here is that the positive decision by the Surface Transportation Board, it advances the project. There likely will be different filings for compensation. They're called takings cases. That can extend the time, but it does not stop the project. And in fact, those takings cases often are then taken up by the federal government. They don't involve trail managers or any claims against those who are working on the ground. So thanks for your persistence. We get it. We try everything we do to make sure that projects can advance as quickly as possible. But I think we have great optimism that there's much more support than there is opposition. And even that opposition, I wouldn't be surprised if it converts as things continue to move forward.
Yeah, and speaking of ambitious projects that are taking time, we're a few years into the launch of the Great American Rail Trail. Do you have any updates for the group? And if anyone has any questions, just once again, if you feel free to put them in the chat for us.
Yeah, so the Great American Railroad Trail, the Great American Rail Trail is now, it was launched in 2019. So although a lot has happened, in many ways, it's still new in terms of formally launching the project where we are now. Of course, it was decades of work to create the trails across the country that ultimately we could take the leadership to now propose connecting them into the first trail that will span the country completely separated from traffic. So what's really exciting is it's moving quickly. In fact, I think quicker than we might have originally estimated. At this point, the project is 54% complete. We passed 2,042 miles this year of 3,700 miles. 31 million was invested this year in the project. To date, 65 million since we started. We think this project and every one that's advancing will get major, major investments with all of these new sources. So we're excited. It's been moving pretty rapidly, but we think it will just accelerate like many others. One thing that's really exciting is one of those gaps that was in some ways most challenging was on the Palouse to Cascades Trail. There needed to be a connector over the Columbia River. And the Beverly Bridge, the Beverly Trestle, was completed, was supported by the state of Washington, by Governor Inslee. $5.5 million project, ribbon was cut, that connection was made. It's the first pedestrian bike crossing of the Columbia River ever. So if that connection can be made, we're pretty optimistic that the other gap closures will start to seal up and accelerate quickly.
Yeah, and we were actually out that way in the Northwest last September for the Trailblazer ride, getting to see some of that Northwest scenery. And I think we should mention some people on the call that the next Trailblazer ride will be on the other end of the Great American Rail Trail, closer to DC, Maryland, West Virginia, September 11th to the 15th. Just a little heads up if people want to put that on their calendar. We'll be sending out emails and reminders about it. But the big reason we're doing that is because the C&O Canal will be getting resurfaced. I know that you've ridden that with your daughters and some coworkers before, but Could you talk a little bit about that project?
Yeah, and Jorge, I'm going to ask you to share your experiences because I think honestly, for a lot of my multi-day trips, I ask you for tips. Where do I go? Where do I stay? So I'm far from the expert. But maybe to start, the C&O Canal, it's a Chesapeake and Ohio canal, and it's essentially a conversion of the towpath along the canal, which goes along the Potomac River from Washington, D.C. up to Cumberland, Maryland. It's 180 miles. And then from there, it connects the Great Allegheny Passage for another 150 miles, ultimately connecting Washington, D.C. to Pittsburgh. From there, of course, it continues west as part of the Great American Rail Trail. It's a gorgeous trail. It's managed by the National Park System. It will be our Trailblazer Society ride this coming year. And one thing that I'll mention is that we're opening a new headquarters for the organization the middle of this year. We plan as one of the first events around our new headquarters is to welcome all of the travelers on the Trailblazer Society tour to our office for a little celebration and party. But I guess the last thing I'd say is I've had the pleasure of doing it with friends, with family, in the middle of the height of COVID, really when things were just starting to open up, but social distancing was really important. I did the whole thing by myself, just as a way to get out and kind of, make meaning of what was happening and recharge in some ways. I'd never done something like that before. I'm sure many of you have done more adventurous things, but I will say that it was challenging. It was invigorating. It was lonely at times, but it was almost spiritual to have that way to connect to nature in just such a personal, intimate way that for me just affirmed the value of rail trails, the value of getting out safely outdoors in ways that we just don't find other ways to do it.
Yeah,
Jorge, you tell me, you're the multi-day expert. What's your take on it?
I'm smiling on my end because the last time I did the CNO was with my wife for our anniversary, and it rained the whole time and was muddy. And then I screwed up and I didn't know that the Paw Paw Tunnel was closed. So I had to hike all of our stuff, all of our gear and our bikes over the mountain. So you should use TrailLink and look ahead before you.
There you go. There you go.
But it was still great. It's kind of funny, even though it was raining and kind of miserable, it was still fun because you're out on the trail. And I think Ken Bryan, what does he always say? A bad day on the trail is better than a good day on the trail, or day on the trail is better than no day on the trail. Something that I'll have to ask him when I see him in Florida in a couple of weeks for some rides down there. But yeah, I'm also looking forward to the new office and ending our ride there. I think it's going to be great. I did want to get down to that local level question that we had. Someone sent in, and this will actually lead into some big news I know that you want to share that's coming out in mid-January. We had a donor, a Trailblazer donor level donor in Jeffersonville, Indiana, asking about how do you move the needle on getting trails built in your community? They're interested as they're retiring. They want to be more involved in the trail movement on the local level, connecting trails in Indiana.
Well, great question, and congrats on the upcoming retirement and chance to get more involved. You live in a state that has become a real leader when it comes to trail development. Governor Holcomb, Representative Kerry Hamilton, they're just amazing leaders, and Indiana has become truly an example of how do you advance trails in ways that involve everyone in communities. So I guess a few suggestions. One would be that we already put out a lot of resources in terms of just that how does one build a trail, how do you acquire corridors, and ultimately get something advancing. It's called our Trail Building Toolbox, and it's on our website. We do lots of webinars through something called the Trail Expert Network, which has over 5,000 volunteers and practitioners across the country tuning in to get best practices and guidance. But the thing that I'm really excited about to share, and it's in just 2 weeks, is going to be the launch of what we think is the next level of movement building and trail development across the country. And it's called the Trail Nation Collaborative, based off of our Trail Nation playbook. So for any of you who live in cities where Rails to Trails has a Trail Nation project, you'll know that for the last 10 years, we've been trying to pioneer building interconnected trail systems in regions and in metropolitan areas. And the whole idea here is that individual trails are great, but when you connect them into a system, you unlock just powerful ability for people to walk, bike, and travel without using a car in some ways that you just can't without something that's really a network. Our research has shown is that when you connect trails together, use goes up as much as 40 to 80%. And so our goal is to really connect regions and cities together in ways that allow for people to use trails both for recreation and for transportation and for anything else. So what the collaborative is it's going to be essentially taking our 10 years of learning in creating trail systems in certain parts of the country and open sourcing all of what it takes to do that anywhere where you live. So we've documented all of the best practices. How do you acquire corridors? How do you build coalitions? How do you do the planning, the geospatial analysis? How do you market it? How do you fill gaps? The whole thing, all that we've learned into the playbook as a way of giving anyone the tools to create trail systems where they are. And we're forming a national learning community. We're calling the Trail Nation Collaborative, bringing together people who have done this, people who are interested, all into a community to both learn from us, but then learn from each other, and ultimately take the shared challenge of connecting trail systems anywhere where you are. So the launch is in 2 weeks. It's on January 19th at 1 p.m. Eastern. And my answer to the question, a very long-winded answer, is come join the collaborative. Come join the playbook. We're trying to put out there the how-to in a way that we've never seen done before for our sector. And honestly, I'd like to say that we'd come just join you there in your community and lock arms and move things forward. We get these questions every day, all the time. So we're trying to find a way to really inspire folks to take what we've learned and carry it forward, and also connect with other people who are interested in the same things.
Thanks, Ryan. I think that really speaks to the kind of the open door that RTC has, where we're always inviting people to send us questions, work with us so that we can help them on the ground. Looking forward to that event on the 19th. I did get a question from somebody typing in. They wanted to ask, where's the new DC office going to be located? And they also wanted to ask about resurfacing of the CNO. They asked if it'll be completed in 2023. That is what I've heard before. And also that the Pawpaw Tunnel the repairs will be done and it will be open. But that's what I've heard. Can you confirm that?
That's as much as I know now. And I think the latest update we had, the CNO is a partner with the Great American was late last year, and that's the intention, is to complete it all here in 2023. For anyone who's done parts that have been resurfaced, it's gorgeous. It's great. I mean, the CNO is always meant to be a little bit more rustic than some other trails, but I think in many ways it provides a nice, comfortable surface while still feeling like you're really on an adventure. So that's the plan. As for the office, we're pretty excited. So we are currently right at the edge of the West End and DuPont Circle neighborhoods, kind of 24th and New Hampshire. We're moving just 3 blocks west. So we'll be on 24th and M Street, kind of solidly in the West End neighborhood. One thing I'm sure anyone here has been kind of sorting through too is, what's the future of work? How do you approach things in a post-COVID world in terms of making the most of kind of virtual life and getting back to in-person life? I'll just say for RTC, we are doing a hybrid approach. We definitely felt it important to have a DC headquarters for all that we do here in the district. We are trying to make the most of virtual work because we are a national organization with offices all around the country. But what was kind of exciting is we were able to shrink our footprint by about 1/3 of our headquarters, be more efficient with our space, and then go into a building filled with all kinds of different meeting amenities, conference rooms, conference centers, things that we think will be beneficial for our work. But our real goal is that we make this space a real hub for the sector. And it's a place that folks who are coming to DC, are part of this movement, are welcome to not only come to visit, but even take advantage of what we have in this space. So we'll have fun at the TBS tour. partying a little bit after an intense ride, but it's a place we'd love to have visitors take advantage of in different ways. I will say one of the more exciting things about this space is it has a rooftop terrace and it faces west. So you can go on the top of this building, look west, and you can literally trace the Great American Rail Trail going west. You can see the Potomac, you can see where it goes. So kind of a thrill just to be able to hop up on the roof and see the product of and work of many people who've been involved in this effort for decades and decades.
That's pretty exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing it when we get that move on. And I want to give, just looking at time here, if anyone has any last minute questions, type them in, please. I do want to thank Don, who reminded me of what the saying is: a bad day on a trail is better than a good day at the office. Thanks. But
well, it's funny. I think that's right, and I've heard that said about fishing and other things, right? Bad day fishing is better than a good day at work. Not to brag, but just to be grateful. I would say you and I, Jorge, we're blessed with what we do. A good day on the trail, a bad day on the trail is always great. A day at work, it's still kind of working on the trail. So we don't forget that we're able to kind of mesh passion with mission in a way that we're lucky to be able to do every day.
Yeah, I'm pretty grateful for being able to advocate for something that I truly, truly love and care about. Any last words about 2023 before we end this?
Yeah, I guess I would just say, well, first of all, I think what's really exciting about this once in a generation moment is that at the end of the year, we knew that we would have much more in terms of resources, that the advocacy that we've been putting in had paid dividends, that there's just much more federal funding, much more state funding for trail projects to advance all around the country. We knew that the opportunity ahead of us was really to close gaps, that we have 40,000 miles of trails all across the country. And the chance is really to invest in ways that create cohesive systems. But I think maybe the one question that many of us had was, call it a post-COVID world, what would sustain in terms of attitudes and behaviors? And I've talked often about the COVID moment being a chance where people really changed their kind of attitudes about the value of safe outdoor recreation, and then overnight changed their behaviors in the same way. And as things start to quote unquote normalize, we wondered what would happen, would that sustain? Recognizing that some things haven't. We have seen bike sales decline a bit. There are other things that are kind of normalizing. We just got data from the trail counters that we have across the country. And what's really remarkable is that change in use and attitudes seems to be sustaining on into the future. We had in 2022, in fact, a 9.5 increase in trail use nationally than 2021, down just 1.5% from 2020, which of course was the height. But the really remarkable thing is from between 2019 and 2022, a 45% increase in trail usage. And that carries, of course, questions about times trail etiquette, usage, and so on. But I think in terms of, are more people benefiting from trails and active transportation? Will more people be advocates and understand the value? The answer seems to be yes. And that's a pretty exciting way to start the year.
Yeah, it really is a reflection of something you said earlier about it being a new era, not just for the trail movement, but just in the way that people view how they can recreate and get around town. I'm going to check. I don't have any other questions. Thank you for your time, Ryan. I think we're just about at 2:30 on the dot. And I also want to thank everyone who tuned in for being supporters and for doing what you can to help us push the trail movement, but also if you're getting involved on the ground in your neighborhood, we really applaud you. Any last words, Ryan?
I would just echo what you said, Jorge. Everything we talked about here in terms of successes or opportunities, it's because of supporters like you all. It wouldn't be possible without your involvement and your support. So thank you so much for being a part of the organization. Our success is your success. And every one of those people who's out on trails, all those additional people, they're better off because of your investment. So thank you. Thank you for your support in 2022. Can't wait to connect with you this year.